Hello, everybody. Seeing a lot of familiar names, which is so nice. While we're waiting, I just want to let everybody know that Terry, it is his day off. And he is joining us because, first of all, he just rocks. And second of all, he says that we're that important. I'm like calling a BS on that a little bit, but that's very nice anyway. So thank you, Terry, for doing this on your day off.
Thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely. So why don't we start out? Those people who will join a little bit later can just catch up. So most of you should know me at this stage. My name is Dorota Olkowska. I'm the sales manager for Shing Digital. And with me is Terry McGraw. Terry, would you like to do a little bit of an intro as to who you are?
Yeah, here's where the self-aggrandizement comes in, right? So
Perfect.
I'm Terry McGraw. I've been with SecureWorks, affiliated with SecureWorks about 8 years now. 6 years of that was running. I was the vice president of service delivery for all of our SOC operations. The last couple of years, I've been an executive consultant with SecureWorks, and that's the role I continue to play, as well as the deputy chief threat intelligence officer for the company, which really is sort of all the threat research, the incident response, and security risk consulting is sort of in that umbrella under Barry Hensley, who's our CTI. Before that, I spent 27 years in the military. I was in the Army for 27 years, the last 10 of which I did counterintelligence and cyber warfare operations with things like NetCom, Army Cyber, and the NSA, as well as abroad with the 160th Task Force forward. So that's me in a nutshell.
And you play guitars, clearly. So
I play ukulele, actually. I'm actually, the guitar back there is my father's. When he passed, it came to me, but I don't know a thing about guitar, but I do play ukuleles.
Okay. So if we don't have enough questions at the end of the 30 minutes, we'll ask you to play us a ukulele.
No problem.
Okay. So let's start out with the questions. Today, we are talking about work from anywhere, which is a very obviously important topic, especially due to the most recent world events and the fact that now we are literally working from anywhere. So for the attendees, as you have questions, please put them in the chat or in the Q&A, whichever one works for you. I have some questions, but I, of course, want to make sure to ask your questions. They take priority. This is definitely a Q&A, not a presentation. So please take advantage of it. Ask as many questions, preferably about work from anywhere versus a ukulele or Terry's further experience. So first question, working from anywhere, we access a lot of different networks, we're accessing VPNs and so forth. Why does this create a risk for our organizations?
Well, I think it's so. If you sort of flash back, we've been moving on the digital transformation for quite a long time now. I think the COVID pandemic just accelerated what was naturally occurring, right? More remote workforce, more fluid workforce, trying to recruit expertise from other areas. And, I think that, and we always had sort of a mobile sales force. So the environment really isn't new, but the scale and impact of having your entire workforce have to move to remote in a very short period of time really kind of created security gaps for everyone. And then in the traditional environment of a trusted environment where people come into the office, they badge in, they can sit in in a relatively secure environment and log into system resources. That model tended to work. And when your entire workforce is now working from home, and you had a single VPN concentrator that was used to 20 people logging in, and now it's got 250 people trying to log in, it spelled a lot of disaster. So rapidly having to rethink your security architecture, and moving to sort of from the traditional trusted environment or trust everywhere from a protected environment to I don't trust anything. And really what we're talking about is I don't trust anything. So the environment is I'm coming in the environment. We must assume that everything is compromised. I'll give you a great, I don't know if it's an analogy or a metaphor, either way. If you looked at an airport, what we were all used to was when I went to the airport, I went through the TSA, I had my bags inspected, and then I got through the security checkpoint. I could go anywhere, right? I logged in, I got access to everything in the airport.
Mhm.
In the zero trust methodology, and I'm a big believer in sort of the NIST frameworks, not because I'm a big, compliance and regulatory monster, but if you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there. So some of the NIST frameworks are really, really well thought. I'm a big fan of NIST, but in their zero trust architecture, this is kind of the metaphor that explains it the best. And I really think this is what we're actually trying to achieve in this very distributed workforce, is better ways of getting to a zero trust in a faster way, because I'm bringing my own devices, I'm logging in from home, I'm in untrusted networks, logging in, the entirety of that threat landscape is now just everywhere.
Mhm.
So you've extended your entire attack surface from your office building now everywhere in the world. And so the zero trust architecture is really designed to sort of get after how we treat everything as suspect. And so in the new model, I would go through the TSA checkpoint. So imagine in the new model of zero trust, I still have to go through the checkpoint, but I'm now only allowed to go to the gate to which the airplane that I'm assigned in the Delta or the
Mhm.
JetBlue or whatever, and I'm only allowed to go to the gate that I'm logging in. And then once I'm in that waiting area, I then also have to identify myself to get onto the plane, and I'm only allowed to go to my seat. Right. So the zero architecture is saying that for every one of those transactions, I'm authenticating who I am in order to be in that place and
Mhm.
nowhere else. It is the definition of least privilege.
Mhm.
And if I had to go to the bathroom, I go and buy a soda, I still have to come right back in. I still gotta, like, the airport attendant just saw my face 10 seconds ago. That doesn't matter. I still have to show
Got
who
it.
I am, and I'm only allowed to do these things. I have to revalidate. And so what we're talking about is the transactional access granted to a device, a person, and data, system to system, people to system. And each transaction has to be authenticated. And so that's the goal. Now that's really, really difficult to achieve, but we can get there in steps, and we can get there quicker than others by sort of, how do I segment my network? What is it? How do I implement multi-factor authentication? Where is it implemented? It should be everywhere. How do I provide a more granular way to, least privilege? So for example, most Microsoft servers come with the ability to do application allow listing, in their file server management system. So I can literally get very granular as to not only who has access to that data, what access can be authorized and by whom, and it won't let me access anything based on my privilege. So it can get very, very granular in the systems we already have available.
Mhm.
You can do a lot with what you're already investing. I'm sorry.
I need to have a little poking device so that I can interrupt you,
No,
because we have a
just wave
couple.
your hand.
Because I have a couple of questions. Tony is asking, what is the best way or system to remote in?
What Securix has done is gone to sort of an application layer authentication. So VPN is now at the individual application. So we create sort of sandbox environments, which assumes that your box is compromised and you're only allowed to, you must come in through where your applications are allowed. And so it encrypts those connectivity to only those things that you're allowed to have. So what's the best system to remote in? Why? There's several that we use a solution called AppGate. There's several. I mean, it's really hard to say. It depends on sort of where your architecture is, how distributed and how remote your workforce is. Are you allowing them to bring their own device, or are they allowing them to use their devices from home? I think we could probably have a whole segment on that itself. And
Mhm.
honestly, I'd probably bring in somebody who does competitive analysis of solutions to answer that more fully. I hate to answer things with it
Yeah.
depends, but it's kind of depends. So
So related to that, and you might have a similar answer here, is what is the best type of secure email service that you're seeing? And maybe a way of approaching it is to explain how to determine that for individually for an organization.
yeah, well, so it's always about cost, market dominance, market acceptance, and security. We use Microsoft, in the cloud, of course, Exchange. I'm a huge fan of those solutions for their security granularity as well as the methodology. No, I just look, as far as I think the prevalence of the market, clearly Exchange has the edge on everyone. I will answer that by saying you must consider the security configurations that you employ. So it doesn't matter what your Exchange server is, or your email server is, if you don't have a multi-factor authentication in front of it. yeah, and if you don't have your environment locked down, if you don't have an appropriate level sandbox employed to help weed out, the most obvious kind of phishing traffic, it's really kind of how well have you secured the infrastructure in which you've chosen. Again, I'm a big fan of Exchange only because it's been very thoughtful of how they improve those environments and what comes baked in. But I've also worked for companies that were using GCP and Google products. Again, it's all about how well you secure them, more so than the
Gotcha.
email
Yeah.
server itself. The
Yeah.
email is actually just secondary. It's how well protected it is,
Gotcha.
and how granular are their controls that you can employ.
The questions are coming fast and furious. With a lot of people working from home using their own equipment, is it possible to reach the same high level of security on a network in the presence of bring your own device?
It is actually, in some respects, it can be more powerful if you do it correctly. Like what I said, the zero trust architecture. When you get to that level of granularity where you're getting transactionally approved stuff, when you assume that everything is dirty, when you assume that everything is compromised, you're actually approaching it with a heightened sense of awareness. I think that the methodologies that you do to protect the BYOD environment actually just serve to protect your core business systems even better as well, from internal and lateral movement as well. So I think that the answer is yes, you've widened your attack surface, but if you employ the correct controls, you're actually reducing the ability of an adversary to move laterally through your environment, by treating everything transactionally, by assuming that everything is dirty, by being very granular in access, by employing a very deliberate least privilege architecture in your environment. You can actually come out at a safer place, because we take a lot for granted, right? I mean, remember when you had that sort of that hardened perimeter kind of mentality where everyone comes through one choke point, you basically have a wide open access on the other side.
Yeah.
And by creating very granular transactional authentication, you're actually creating a more secure environment in the long run. But it also depends on how well you do it. Again, I sigh because when you look at the threat landscape, what's still kicking everybody's butt is the same thing that's been kicking people's butt for 30 years. The threat landscape right now is unpatched servers. It's spear phishing. It's compromised credentials. And why do we have compromised credentials? Well, we still don't have multi-factor authentication, and when we do, we don't have it implemented correctly, or it's not everywhere. We're not patching our systems, in a timely manner. We don't know how to prioritize the criticality of them. And, in the end of the day, human social engineering preys upon what makes us human. That's why it works, right? So
Yeah.
that's
Go for the vulnerabilities. Yeah.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
again, I do think you can do it well. I think that it forces us to treat the environment as assume it's compromised.
Yeah.
And then that way you get very granular in how you have access to your data and your systems.
I have a few more questions. Having a traditional security architecture, and now that we are transitioning back into the office, into a hybrid environment, what are the big things that we need to consider?
Actually, so in some respects, the hybrid environment, again, the methodologies that you brought to bear with the distributed workforce just make your enterprise systems that much more secure, right? I mean, zero trust architecture, if done correctly, applies to both your distributed workforce and your internal networks. In fact, having like a single sign-on, where as soon as I single sign on, I got access to everything in the company, is a bad methodology anyway. It always was. The DoD back in the early 2000s, came to this conclusion and started a system called Black Core, which was with DISA and DoD, and it ended up becoming, through lots and lots of iterations, the zero trust architecture that that NIST promulgates. And it was based on that exact problem. Like, if I log in and I have access to everything, it doesn't matter that I'm on a secret network. I have access to everything on the secret network, and that doesn't apply least privilege at all. And so the same goes for your enterprise systems. If I log in and I have access to everything, if there's no role-based access controls on SharePoint or any of your documents, you're letting an adversary who steals credentials have access to everything. And so whatever you employ to create that untrusted zero trust environment, untrusted environment for your distributed workforce, when they bring back in the hybrid environment, you're just better off. It forces us to implement better controls across our architecture. So they're like, for every bad thing, there's a good upside. So
Next question. What are the risks if a work laptop is stolen, and how do we protect the data on it?
yeah, so I mean, if you don't have an encryption methodology for your distributed workforce, I assume you're talking about laptops that the company owns that the
Yes.
workforce
Yeah.
has.
Yeah.
It's a little problematic, but can be done, right? So with the permission of a user, like for example, in SecureWorks, if a user wants to bring their own device and use that own device, we still insist on creating a clean sandbox in that environment on their device. So only applications and authentications can be done via that sandbox. But it's intrusive, it's invasive. It gives the company access. It does give the company access to their personal device. So it requires a compliant workforce, or the alternative is give everybody a company-owned device, which you have an EDR solution on, which you have an encryption methodology for, and you have multi-factor authentication in place just to log on, right? And that can be done very effectively with Windows Hello, right? I mean, you have biometric controls, you have username and password and biometric and pins, and so again, the methodologies haven't really changed. I have a fully encrypted disk that, oh, by the way, must unencrypt at time of login. So if my laptop's stolen, the data is encrypted at rest. I have multi-factor authentication employed for login, so it's not just single factor. And in that device, I have application sandboxing as well. So it's a layered approach. So if someone stole your laptop, it's a brick. And then, oh, by the way, you have installation software that allows you to brick it anyway. So if it does ever log in after it's been reported stolen, you can just go bloop and wipe it. So
I like the sound effects, Terry.
yeah, well,
I've got a big question here.
mhm.
Before the pandemic, we had plans to remove the ability for remote access with dual home split tunneling. With everyone working from home, we will require orders of magnitude higher bandwidth if all traffic is routed through VPN to company networks. Are there compensating controls we can apply in lieu of removing the dual home split tunneling?
Yeah, look at solutions like AppGate. It's an application layer security, right? So it's actually it's giving authorization based on the application and the user's authorization. It doesn't rely on just a single VPN concentrator or even doing split tunneling, right? So you can still use those, but then you're literally creating an application sandbox on top of that. It's what we use in SecureWorks, and it's worked quite well. And I don't know the competitive landscape of the solutions. I know that we use AppGate, so I can only speak to that. I know that it's a marvelously effective solution. And of course, all the applications that we use require granular user access.
So the person who asked that question was anonymous. So if you want more information, email me, please. Next question, and I'm going through these like mad because I don't even know whether we'll be able to get through most of them. As a small company, we're almost 100% reliant on Microsoft 365, using both laptops and mobile phones, plus apps to access and use. Where would SecureWorks products work for us in terms of security? How would a zero trust model work for us without the risk of interrupting the workflow?
Yeah, so I mean, if you're a Windows shop, well, it really matter Windows, Linux, or Mac. It really doesn't matter. If you're SecureWorks has many solutions that could help you. Number one, your environment with an agent, an EDR agent. You can either use ours or you can use CrowdStrike, Carbon Black, or Defender. But it plugs into our monitoring service, and then we watch your environment 24/7. So we take the anomaly detection, the threat detection off your plate, and help you do that at a much more cost effective than trying to do it organically. Antivirus is not an EDR. Please don't conflate the two. I appreciate antivirus vendors, but that's very reactive. You really do need to get a best of breed EDR. SecureWorks has one, CrowdStrike has one, Defender has one, Carbon Black has one. I will allow you to do your own market analysis. We have an XDR solution that you can plug all that into. to do investigative work, and we can do it over top of it. But at the end of the day, what you really need on those endpoints is a good EDR solution. The beauty of a secure kind of solution with the XDR is you can plug your network applications into that as well. So you can have your firewalls, you can have your NetFlow, you can have your cloud applications, all that being plugged into XDR. So you can do investigations across your entire infrastructure right down to the EDR tool. So it's how do you detect the so what of what happened, right? And so in that environment, look, it's incredibly expensive to do security well on your own. I'll give you a couple data points. In the US, a frontline analyst in our security operations center, the all-in cost of the company is between $115,000 and $125,000 per person. For 24/7 monitoring, if you were going to do that yourself, you need to hire a minimum of 9 people, preferably 12, right? So it's 9 people for 3 shifts, giving time for breaks, PTO and whatnot, and a couple of managers. That's $1.5 million of investment to do 24/7 monitoring your environment. That's not cost effective. So I highly recommend you get a partner. I promised I wasn't gonna do sales pitching, but a company like SecureWorks will take a lot of that off your plate for a price point that you could not even come close to doing on your own. And so if you really want to say, how do I protect my environment? I think by the way, there's nothing wrong with O365. If you implement those security controls, like you disable the legacy controls, you have multi-factor authentication in place, please insist on the multi-factor authentication for those environments. That's true of whether or not you're using O365, GCP, or any other Azure mechanism, or any other things that you're standing up. It's imperative. If you don't have MFA, you are asking to have your worst day coming. And oh, by the way, just because it's in the cloud doesn't mean it's patched. So make sure that you've got everything up to date and it's continually updated.
So we've got 5 minutes and I won't get through all the questions. So for all of those people who ask the questions, just so you know, I will have the remainder answers by Terry via email to all of you. Okay, so let's just get maybe through one more, and this will kind of close off more than likely our session. This one is mine, not yours, sorry. But I would love to hear your recommendations, Terry. You're very, very knowledgeable, clearly in the marketplace. I would love to hear your final comments with regards to work from anywhere, specifically with regards to the landscape as well, the current landscape, and to leave our attendees here with some kind of final thoughts on the topic.
All right, I'm gonna run to the back of this deck because this slide right here. If you looked at the landscape, right now, e-crime is your number one likely, attack and probably the most impactful. Ransomware is a real and pressing threat against everyone that's in the sound of my voice. And the losses are in the trillions across the globe to e-crime networks. These are not hooders and hackers in hoodies. These are sophisticated criminal networks that employ young kids and hackers in hoodies. But they function in the underground economy that is a near-peer competitor to your business. These are not lone wolves. These are very sophisticated criminal networks. And so you have to take this as a competitive environment. So it's not, you can't think of this transactionally. You have to do this like every day and you have to do it well. But there's time not to be a victim. Of the things that we recommend from the 1,400 incident response engagements we did, that's people who ended up getting shellacked, and we came in and we cleaned them up and said, here's all the things that you did wrong. Please go do these right next time. Multi-factor authentication is the number one. In every single instance of e-criminal activity, there is a compromised credential involved and then an escalation of privileges. And that's always done because credentials were easily obtained. So if you don't have multi-factor authentication employed correctly, and you don't have it everywhere, you have it no. Antivirus is not an EDR agent. Please don't conflate the two. An appropriate EDR looks for threat behaviors as well as signature-based, and it is how it's about how tactics, techniques, and procedures that have evaded security controls are detected in your environment. Patch management. It's between 35 and 43%. It vacillates, month over month, of the initial access vectors that we see. The initial access vector, because it scales better for the adversary, is through an unpatched system or server. And that's again, be brilliant at the basics to avoid having your worst day. Privileged access management. Like how well are you segmenting your admin and Active Directory controls? That's one of the least understood and most poorly done things is in our Active Directory security controls. I'll also say backups. It's not good enough to have a backup solution unless you've actually tried to bring back a critical system or segment of your environment from that backup to prove it can be done. Real quick vignette. I had an incident response engagement I was called in on. The company had a hybrid environment where they had probably 60% of their applications in the cloud. They had a significant data center on-prem. They had a backup system. The on-prem system was compromised. It was hit with ransomware. It was taken offline. Cloud applications were behind MFA. They were fine. 5 weeks later, when the systems were trying to come back online, all of those API connections between servers in the cloud and systems in the data center were now 5 weeks out of temporal alignment, and the backup solution they had no way to marry the time difference between the data sets, so the data was useless. They couldn't bring it back up to an effective degree. So it's not just do I have the backups, is are the backups valid and can they work? And then on top of that, with the evolution of ransomware, data exfiltration is almost always going to be a component of e-crime and ransomware activity. So do you have the ability to determine when data has been accessed by whom, and if exfiltrated, do you know what the data criticality is? So those are the basics of the things that you should do and do well. Happy to discuss that at length any other time.
Terry, thank you so much. It always stuns me how quickly this 30 minutes goes by. I will be emailing you some questions because we have some remaining questions that need to be answered. But thank you so much for your time, especially on your day off. And I'm very sad that you did not get to play the ukulele for us. But I also want to thank everybody who attended. Fantastic session. Again, went by way too fast, and hope to see you guys on the next session in a couple of weeks. Thank you very much and have a lovely day.
Thank you very much.